Beat Podcast wird euch präsentiert von Tascam.
In this episode of the Beat Podcast presented by Tascam, our guest is Belgian composer, producer, improviser and label owner Dirk Serries. My name is Tobias Fischer, and for me this interview is something truly special. The work of Dirk Serries has accompanied me for half my life essentially. I first came into contact with it at the end of the 90s when Dirk released a trilogy of releases on American metal label Relapse. These releases were still ambient. In fact, they marked the absolute peak of his ambient phase. At the same time, they were something completely different. He included drum machine beats, guitar harmonics, very minute microprocessing, and invited guests like Porcupine Tree Steven Wilson to accompany him on trips which were both mesmerizing and mysterious. Only a year later, he changed his project name from Vida op Mana to Fearful's Burning and started going into a completely different direction. Now, producing post-rock on his own, using solo guitar, loop pedals and effect units. Eventually, this path would lead him back to his ambient roots with the Microphonics releases, which were probably even purer than ever, but this time produced using a guitar rather than electronic devices. Today, Dirk is recording as a free improviser on his A New Wave of Jazz label. This is definitely out there, left field music, very complex sometimes, but at the same time spontaneous and direct and in your face, always with an atmospheric twist to it. I still think it's incredibly fascinating music, and it, of course, all these changes provide for a fantastic basis for an interesting conversation about the different periods in his career and about the different production techniques he's developed over the years to come up with individual and truly fascinating results. This is an in-depth conversation, so grab a cup of coffee, take a comfortable seat, and enjoy. So, legacy. 2004. I think this was actually the first full-length Vida op Mana album I listened to consciously. I had the Noise anthology, which had just come out on Project, but I think this was the very first one I listened to consciously. I did think I knew The River of Appearance on the side. I'd listened to that, but this was the first one. And I remember hearing this for the first time and thinking this is like nothing I'd ever heard, like literally. So different, so unique, and I also thought it was difficult music in a way. So I loved it, and I also thought it was messing with my head. Maybe can you tell me a bit where you were at, like the mind in 2000? This was effectively the last Vida op Mana album, I think.
Correct, indeed. It was the last chapter of a trilogy I did for Relapse Release Entertainment, and actually, you I think you nailed it in a way, because for me also it's like the entire trilogy has been a sort of a mindfuck, to be honest, because not only I felt myself at the end of what Vida op Mana could be, or could be for me in terms of telling a musical story, and at the same time I also felt like out of place in the entire ambient world as well. Because I always have been trying, even, like The River of Appearance is called, this is the milestone of Vida op Mana for a lot of people, and they still ask me for it, and they still ask me if I would do another album like that. They still do. It's amazing. So, but for me that was like, okay, I've done that, and I want to move on, and I always felt that a lot of critics, musicians, and also the audience couldn't appreciate or couldn't understand what I was trying to do. That was actually evolve as a musician, as a human being, also within the realm of what ambient is about. So I tried to incorporate different elements, different instruments and so forth, but I felt that I couldn't reach like a satisfaction in the scene of ambient. So from the moment that Relapse, wrote me that email and said, hey, we want to do like an album with you, I felt this is like the escape route. this is like this felt really like, this is the moment I can do something with Vidna, transform it to something else. But at the same time, I felt that this could be the swan song as well, because I felt that if I push it so far, then there would be no way back. And then I feel that, okay, then I have to close it. And I have been doing that with all my projects in a way, I feel that when it's on a high, I should stop it, and then I move on to different things. And that is actually what I felt when doing the trilogy, like the Tremor, Spore, and Legacy albums. And Legacy, I think, is the culmination of it all, because it features different musicians as well, but it also features a lot of different elements from my industrial past, but also different things, like when I'm incorporating the more ethnical instruments I used to do before, but I used them completely in different style. And that's probably what you say is also so makes it so significant and so strange and so anormal, so to speak, because the combinations made it so different to adjust to, I think.
Probably. I think it's also interesting that the project in a way came, it's not like a circle, it's more like a curve which goes up and then goes down. I mean, many people call Vidna a noise project, which then became an ambient project. But to me, when I listen to the old stuff, it feels like it's that noise, like the ambient organically came out of the noise, and then it reverted back to a more noisy thing. It's almost like noise. What people call noise and ambient are like they come from the same space in a way with you. That's very interesting. But maybe you can talk just very briefly about that. How these two.
Yeah, it's like that's typical with human beings, as I do, and probably you do as well, but we tend to label it all the time. We always want to categorize it, and whether it's noise or it's ambient, but why can't it be all at the same time? And that's why I always felt also with my harsh industrial period, okay, there were a couple of really aggressive albums, but in a way I always tried to bring in something that was more organic. I was a little bit more ethereal. And that always has been in there for me. And the ambient phase is just like an obvious, like you said yourself, obvious transition from the industrial. And what happened with the trilogy on Relapse is that I felt the possibility to actually incorporate both of them, but in a more musical way, so to speak. My musical world, of course. I mean, a lot of people say that's not musical, but for me it was like, okay, now I'm combining both elements all together in one thing that is Vidna. And Vidna was always from in the beginning something that always could, transform into something else.
Yeah. The studio was called Serenity Studio at the time, right?
Yeah.
That was your home studio. Can you talk just a bit? How did that look like at the time?
Serene. I always have been like me. I always have been a little bit like a control freak, perfectionist, and that was also what my studio was about. It was tight, it was clean, it was everything had its place. Of course, I had tons of synthesizers, outboard effects. And you have all the wires, but everything needed to be like really organized, really like it's like for me it was a room to go into and be in a different setting, be in a different pace, be in a different mindset as well. And that's for me that's why I called it Serenity Studio, because it feels for me, okay, I don't want to go into a busy room and then start to create my own music. That doesn't fit with me, that doesn't really feel right. So I really wanted to make something special, like that's a room I can really chill in, so to speak. And that's why I called.
This was the basement of your house, right? It's like
no, just a separate bedroom. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Always has been from a small one to a little bigger one to a bigger one, but it always has been like a separate bedroom or separate guest room or whatever. Yeah. Never had a basement.
Were you using laptops at all, computers?
No. Only until actually of course, the technology started to be so advanced that you could start to record on laptop and computers. Then it became, of course, for me, it became obvious that I had to, switch over, because tapes or DAT or ADAT or whatever, has been, or CD recordable. It was just like a period that went out of time, that was old fashioned. So, of course, then I invested into laptop. But performing with laptops or making music with laptops, never. No.
The trilogy that was, I think you told me at the time, that was recorded to Tascam, right? That was still analog.
Correct.
Recorded. Yeah.
Yes. That was all analog. So it means that when something goes wrong, then you have to do it again. And that's because you can't edit like on a laptop. Now you can just go in and cut a little bit and crossfade and whatever, and you disguise the mistakes. But at that time, even when you had a multi-track, you still when you're recording one track, and that's fine, and you're recording another track, and that other track goes wrong, then you have to go all over again. And then so it has been that process was a very long process, actually. Nothing is perfect, nothing is right from the first time. So you have to go on and on and on. And of course, with coming, with the laptops and the recording, like Pro Tools and all the Logic and all these, software systems, that made it so easy or easier, but at the same time also more complex, because the possibilities are so, they are endless. Yeah. And that also can really, make your mind completely go nuts, So it's a pro and contra thing, when the laptop and the software came.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that the techno music from the 90s, even though that was like completely sequenced and very different what you're doing, the interesting thing is that the early techno tracks are all recorded live. I mean, they were setting things up and then they were playing it, but they were muting and putting effects on it in real time. And I think that's how your music worked as well. And to me, even today, like today in techno music, you have a lot more possibilities to go into the sound, make super minute changes, and still the music doesn't feel as alive as it did back then. And I think with your music, it's the same. Like it benefits from this live feeling that it has.
Oh, absolutely. And that's also has been for me like that probably announced also the ending of Vietnam Mana for me, because I felt that I was more in a laboratorium than actually making music or creating sounds. I mean, you become a slave to the system, to that software system, because you have the possibilities are so endless. Oh, what if I do this? What if I do that? And you lose it. I completely lost it. So, and that definitely was the end of Vietnam Man, and that made me switch over to other projects which were really more rudimentary, like Microphonics and Fearful's Burning. So, and that was actually not only because it was an artistic ending, because I couldn't feel any inspiration anymore with Vietnam Man, but also due to the technology. It just became too much for me.
There was one thing before we move on, which I wanted to ask specifically, is the drums on the trilogy recording, on all three. They sound great, and I'm really curious, were you using drum machines or are they?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Which one were you using?
I was using a Dr. Rhythm, a Boss Dr. Rhythm, an old Dr. Rhythm. I was using the 606 from Roland. But all heavily processed, of course.
You can't hear it that clearly, no.
Yeah, there is a couple of hand percussion as well in it, but it's all very in the mix. So I definitely want not to, go on the route like, oh, it's an ethnical, tribal album. I really didn't want to do it, but I was still, incorporating those, hand percussion, the Fujara flutes. Yeah. I was still incorporating it all, but in a totally different, way, heavily processed, so that it was more, part of the entity than oh, this is like a fusion album or whatever, Yeah. So it's.
And you recorded the results via the entire thing via microphone in the space, or did some of these like drum machines, did they go directly into the?
They go directly into the mixing board. Eh?
Okay.
Yeah. With all the outboard, like all the distortion pedals I have, because I used to have a lot of pedals. Mm-hmm. So that's where I could really apply all these effects on top of each other in a chain.
Yeah.
Just to create those, and sometimes they also show imperfections. Like for instance, on Spore, there is one particular piece called Skin Strip, which has in the rhythm, a really high feedback-ish section, and that was not on purpose, but I left it in because I couldn't filter it out because the pedal effects all together just generated that feedback noise. But that was a coincidence, and I felt, okay, this is great, but it was not on purpose I did it. It was just like one of those things that happens with when you put analog pedals in a chain. And is what you don't have that much when you use fully digital software things, because everything is so precise. You can also do it in overload, of course, but it's different. Then it's on purpose. But here with analog things, it has its own life,
Spore, that was the second one?
That's the second one, yeah.
Because that one to me is really the outlier. That one is fascinating. That's another different story. Okay, so which is interesting, as a second one to talk about, it chose Dreamtime Return by Steve Roach. Mm-hmm. So it kind of fits in a way because Vino Mana obviously collaborated with him. Maybe, I think you met in Germany in 1993, I read for the first time. Do you remember, I think he said he'd listened to, Passage in Beauty?
Yeah.
And you'd only discovered his music a year earlier. Do you remember why you both thought it could make for a good, there's obviously sonic connections, but why you thought this could really work?
Yeah, I didn't know in advance, of course, but when I discovered this music at a local, back then they still exist, local New Age record store in Antwerp, I went there just to check out if there was interesting music, because I wasn't interested in New Age. But you see, even Steve Roach music was categorized as New Age, so there you go with how wrong labels can be. But anyway, I stumbled into the store and something was playing, and I said, "Oh, what is this?" And that was Steve Roach, and that was from the Origins album, which I found, it's one of my favorite albums of him. And I said, "Oh, this I need to buy." So I bought immediately, an entire range what he had in stock. So I went home and I started to listen to it, and then I found out he was playing in Paderborn, if I was correct, in Germany, Paderborn. Mm-hmm. And then I went to see him, talked to him afterwards, and somehow there was a connection. Mm-hmm. There was like, it felt natural. It felt, like, and Jorge was there also, and Elmar Schult, I think, was also there, if I'm correct. I'm not sure. But yeah, with Steve, it was just like an incredible, immediate connection. And then, he took home, my Passage in Beauty album, and then we started to collaborate. Back then, of course, communicate. Back then, of course, by letter, because there was no internet yet. If I'm thinking 1993, there was no internet yet. So
it started around that time. Yeah,
but slow internet.
Yeah.
But anyway, it took us a while to get actually to start collaborating, but the connection was made definitely in Germany. Yeah.
Yeah, it's really and Dreamtime Return. Did you hear that like before you started working with him?
That was one of those I bought at the New Age store. Dreamtime Return, Origin, World's Edge, and if I'm correct, the trilogy he had, but that the ambient one, Structures from Silence, was that. Yeah.
Quiet music.
Quiet music. That's the one I was looking for. Yeah, quiet music. Yeah. So yeah, that was the how must I say, the full infuse of Steve Roach at the same time when I just came into that. I just saw the store. Okay, let's go in, and then just accident. He was playing Steve Roach on the speakers, and boom, there he was. Because I never heard of him. Of course, I come from a totally different, field. I come from the underground cassette network, my only inspiration was Brian Eno in terms of ambient. So, and that's due to what we will come to later on, my Bible, which I call my Bible, no pussyfooting. So it has been really like a very coincidence that I found this music, but there was an instant, what I heard was that is something have been looking for a long time, and I suddenly heard it through the speakers, and from that moment on, a friendship grew. So.
He came from Klaus Schulze, actually, which is, I think, an artist in his prime, which you also can appreciate.
Absolutely.
And Kraftwerk. I don't know if you know his first band, Möbius, which Möbius, they did an electronic cover version of The Doors' Light My Fire in Kraftwerk style.
I didn't know that.
That's amazing. I think
to check it.
It's not. You can buy it. It's not that expensive, actually. Even though it's really rare, there's a limited print on. I think the interesting thing is sort of you came from similar but not entirely the same directions, and the albums you recorded together with Steve, it seems like you pushed yourselves even deeper. And you found yourselves, I think, in a way, I think he did too. I think if I listen to the music he did before and then afterwards, something did change. And I think like some of the albums, like recording like an album of 3 CDs filled to the brim with these long, expansive tracks. And it's almost like you were redefining what a composition means and what the space, like a sonic space is. Tell me a bit maybe about the process you worked on, like for the albums you recorded together, because I know some of that was recorded on location in Belgium and then in America, and some of it was like arranged through file sharing, I would say, or sending CDs.
There's only one that was actually made by file sharing. That was Inner Zone.
Okay.
That's the only album we did not really, personally together in the studio. But all the other ones were in the studios. Because we felt also that, apart from the fact that at that moment I didn't feel really comfortable with improvising. Because I was a control freak, I was a perfectionist. But at the same time, with him in the space, it became something different, and we were actually improvising all the time. See where we could go, what would work, what would not work. If we could keep that track or we couldn't keep that track, and it became almost like a playground for us. Whether it was in the studio here in Belgium or it was in his studio at the Time Room in Arizona, it was for us just like an obvious thing. Okay, let's start out with this idea, and we will play around with it, and we actually had a lot of fun because we were laughing all the time in the studio. It was really fun, dancing and cheering, and really it was not serious composer style at all.
It's interesting because from the music you couldn't exactly tell.
No, it was really like a lot of fun. It was really we were. I remember with Well of Souls, that particular, the last track on the first album, The Gathering, is that track when he introduced that groove, and I was playing keys on it, we were just dancing all the time, and then we went to the keys again, and we added some more layers. We were dancing. It was so infectious in a way, and. Yeah, that were amazing times because you're more or less at the prime of what we were doing at that moment. We felt that also, that we could really connect and that there were no issues whatsoever. We were not talking about, we were just doing it. And then secondly, of course, for me it was amazing, especially when you're in Arizona and he had this studio, overlooking the Sonoran Desert, which is. So it's like a mind trip as well, So it's everything collided, and also when he came over to Belgium, which is when he was still living in Westmalle, then it was a small studio, of course, totally the opposite of what his studio is about, with the vast, nature and everything. And I was in this small village. Everything was built close to each other. but even there, we managed to pull inspiration from a totally different, source. So it was unique, with him, and I told him also when I ended Vietnam Man, I said, okay, this is the end of the route for me. I want to go somewhere else, and we still are in touch. We still still good friends. We talk to each other, but we went different paths. But that's okay, It's like, but the phase was amazing. The phase was really amazing with him. Yeah.
Would be interesting to hear you doing a collaboration now, like with you playing the guitar in a free improv style.
Yeah. We talked about it very briefly when we went back to the United States during the year that Trump was elected. Actually, it was during the elections itself when we were there, so it wasn't really like fun to see that happening on television. But anyway, it's like we were there and we talked about it. Like, but I don't think he's ready for that.
Maybe one final question about that. The topic of collaboration in general. You've done countless collaborations, like playing with other people. From your long experience, what makes the best collaborators for you? Like people who you see completely eye to eye with, or people who will take a completely opposite stance, who are completely different from what you do?
Both, I think. They can work to each other's benefit. Because I feel like why do I do a lot of collaborations? Because it pushes my music to different levels I probably can't reach when I'm doing solo stuff. And secondly, also is to actually go deep into the mindset of the other musician as well, because how does he tick? What does he want to do? And for me, both modus operandi, so to speak, have been intriguing, sometimes successful, sometimes less successful. I'm not going into detail there, but at least you try.
Yes.
And that's what makes me probably as a musician and as a human being again more mature, more evolved, because you learn from that. And that's the thing I always have. I always want to learn, even now with the free impro. I still want to learn. I still want to explore different things, put myself on the edge to see if I can do it or not, or if I fail, I fail. If it's successful, fantastic. But each of them are part of who you are and how where you want to go to. And I feel that both of those styles in collaborating have been beneficiary to, I think, to where I am now, and hopefully the collaborators are feel the same way.
Yeah. Okay, then let's go over to the first piece of equipment for today. It's the Korg MS-20. Was this the first synthesizer you bought?
Yes. Yeah. I got it from my parents. Yeah.
Ah, you got it. It was a present, sort of.
It was a present. I started out actually with making noise music by using lock grooves on vinyl. So I worked with rubber bands.
Yes.
And little pieces of paper clips and so forth to actually make the needle jump back and forth into a groove.
Yes.
And that's with a little DJ mixing table, mixer, and a couple of effects. That's were the first experiments, and I felt that I couldn't really evolve. And then my parents said, okay, you can have a synthesizer, and I found one, Korg MS-20. Found one and that was so nice because I was living in Hoboken in Antwerpen, and I found one in the village where I'm living now. So it's very strange, and that was in 1984 or 5.
Okay.
I found that synthesizer, or I bought that synthesizer from an old guy who. From a blind young guy he didn't want to work with it anymore, and so I came to his parents' house, and he was there, and it was a blind guy, and there was an immediate connection as well because he was really like a friendly guy. He understood what I really wanted to do with it, and everything is like, oh, what you're doing this because eventually, if you buy yourself a Korg MS-20, you're not going to use that to make beautiful melodies because you almost can't with it because it's a rough machine. It's like a beast. It's like, that's why I wanted to buy it as well, because it was used by most of the power electronics, noise, industrial music all the time. Korg MS-20 was the beast, the machine, the main one that you could do all these, strange things with. So that was a really funny, little experience there with a guy. Oh yeah, this is my, but I don't want to use it anymore. So, and eventually now I'm living in the same village where I bought my.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you no longer. Do you still have the MS-20?
No. It died on me actually.
Ah.
Yeah, it died on me in, I think it was mid-90s, and then that's also something which sometimes I overreact, and then I suddenly start to sell everything, and that is what I did after Vietnam Mana. I felt so burned out on all the synthesizers that I sold everything. I only kept my pedals and the electric guitar. So that's typical me, Then I sell something suddenly, and then afterwards I want it back because then I say, maybe I can do something else with it. But anyway, that's probably the process of evolution, right?
Well, they released a reissue of the MS-20.
Yeah.
But you were not tempted to buy one?
I was, but at the same time, I have it on a plugin, so I can use it that way if I want to. But at the same time, I really want to keep the studio really focused on what I do now, and that's all most of the time all acoustic. Yeah.
Because the MS-20, in a way, I think I think after the MS-20, you went and bought the M1 and worked with the M1, using it as a workstation, doing what people today would do in a DAW on like a tiny screen. But the MS-20 sort of has this punk feeling, doesn't it? I mean, it's really...
Absolutely. I think it was also used by a lot of indeed post-punk bands. I think even Joy Division used one, if I'm correct.
So too, yeah.
So yeah, absolutely. It was also a very percussive element. You could do a lot of percussive things with it. So, and that made it so stand out from all the other synthesizers that were, out there, like the Oberheim Expander and all these, more expansive, big synthesizers. That one was, it was a unique one. It was really a unique one.
And monophonic, so...
And monophonic, really monophonic, because you couldn't really do any... There were some, some things you could really try with it, like with a little bit of fade out and fade ins, but no, it was monophonic at all, it was, but one of the unique ones, and I think they still realize that the Korg MS-20 remains. That's why they probably reissue it, because there was no other synthesizer like that.
I think FX Twin used it, and he said it's remarkably versatile in terms of the sounds you can make with it. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I remember the first concert I did with the Korg MS-20. I wrote down all the settings. But of course, then it has to be so precise, and in the dark you couldn't see it, and then the complete concert was a drama because each setting was sounding totally different from what I expected it was going to be, what I prepared at home. So it's like, it's a totally unpredictable machine, but at the same time it makes it so unique, and so fascinating.
Yeah. So let's move on to the next of your productions. Microphonics 1 to 5, again an album, not like, I think singling out a single track doesn't make sense. Maybe just as a personal history for that album, I remember that very distinctly. That's 2008 when it was released. And I was traveling to China with my girlfriend, and we took a long bus ride, so night bus. And I remember having that on, it must have been probably either the CD or a tape I'd made. And I listened to the first piece while I couldn't sleep in these bunk beds and on the bus. And we were driving around the Chinese countryside from these towns which all look the same and which are like they're built completely different than the city here. You drive through and you feel like you've not seen anything, and then there's long stretches of empty road, and the sun was coming up, and I was listening to that music, and then listening to the entire album as we were driving through these, like, to me, completely alien and foreign cities, and it felt like the soundtrack, like it had been made for that trip. So I remember this, like, every time I put that on, it's very distinct. It's like, either way, from 2004 to 2008, it's just 4 years, but so much happened in those 4 years to come from legacy to this. What was the difference, not just in the terms of like the production, but like the feeling you were looking for when it comes to microphonics and Vietnam?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's why I felt at the ending of Vietnam, I felt like I'm here stuck at a sort of at the end of a, you know, or in the beginning of a tunnel, whatever. So I felt really stuck, and it coincided actually with a real burnout. So, and I really went off the hill, you know, really. I mean, it was a heavy time, and it took me, you know, almost like 2 years to actually recover from the burnout I had. So, and then I felt, you know, when I was back on my feet, I felt, okay, I need to do it differently. I really want to explore more like the pleasure of playing music or creating sound, instead of, you know, going deep into what could be maybe a piece or not, you know, software wise, I mean. So that's why I started, because back then already I sold my synthesizers and I only kept the guitar and the looping pedals. And then I just decided to, okay, why don't I try this? Bought myself a small amp. At the same time, I got to meet Helmut Neidhart,
Yes,
who was actually a big influence on me, in a way, not musically, but the way how he presented his music, the way how he actually applied these tools to generate what he wanted to do. And that for me became like, it's not like I was copying his tools because I had my own tools, but the way how he did it, the way how his philosophy, his approach was so inspiring that I started to look in my own pedals, how could I apply my own instruments to a thing that which is my own, and I can still make, or I still can have pleasure in creating it on the spot.
yes.
Even when it was a little bit composed, because still microphonics was composed prior to performing. So, and that made microphonics come alive in a way. Couple of pedals, a looping one, a small amp, and a guitar.
Yes.
And that was while I tried to, not really well, because it still sounds too different, but in a way I tried to actually regenerate the Vietnam approach or the Vietnam atmosphere with that kind of setting. Although it didn't succeed that well, but it generated its own particular, you know, phase in my life, and that was microphonics.
Yeah.
Until that one, of course, reached its, you know, possibilities.
Yeah. You said that these pieces were composed, so that means you had themes.
Yes, themes, yeah.
And then you played them live during the gig.
Exactly. And then, of course, in relation to how the looping pedals, because I never used looping pedals, probably will come there sooner, but a little bit later on, but I never used looping pedals as a 4/4 process. It always has been like something organic that evolves. So when you get something back from your looping devices, that's how you will interact with it. So a theme indefinitely was there, but that theme evolved over time depending how you played it into the looping devices and how the theme came back to you in the looping device. And so it's a kind of a action-reaction. That was microphonics. It was a kind of an action-reaction setting.
I was going to say the interesting thing is that microphonics, it's a very simple principle, but it can yield incredibly complex and fascinating results. Without giving away your secrets, I'm just curious what you think, why it is that when most people, like 99% of the people who use loop pedals, come up with like incredibly uninspiring stuff, and then there's like some people who can use the repetition principle to come up with really interesting results. What is the switch? What is the difference, do you think?
I mean, I think first of all is like, I think the mistake most musicians do is when they apply a looping pedal, and I see this also like when I go to jazz concerts, and suddenly there is an incredible sax player trying to use a looping pedal and then really fucks it up completely. It's because they just don't realize the potential of looping. They just think, oh, if I put a beautiful little phrase into a looping and it repeats itself, then it will do the magic on its own. No. It's like it's you have to apply it way more organic than that. So you have to think out of the box, so to speak, when you have a looping pedal, and when it's like, for instance, like it's like a one line, that continuously like supports like a loop tape, for instance, that it goes, for like let us say 15 seconds. What is way more interesting is like, why don't you record first silence, just like an idea, and then interact with the silence, not on the spot A, but on somewhere in the along the 15 seconds. For instance, at second number 7, for instance, and then move on, and then you start to generate totally different kind of interactions of all the sounds or the themes you played, instead of just playing one particular phrase, play it back, and then start to interact with that particular phrase, because then you will not generate like something that is lively, but very tight, very boring actually, because it keeps that same kind of tempo.
Yes.
It keeps that kind of same structure, and that's how most of the musicians apply it, like a looping pedal. And sometimes it can be good, like when it's part of something bigger, like a sort of like a little bit of a thing that goes on in the background, but not as your main instrument, not as your main foundation to build up, your structure. Then you have to move away from that and think out of the box and think out of the zone of the strict lines of the A and the beginning and the end. And that's what I did, this like what I applied with my looping pedal, which is actually a long delay pedal. My main looping pedal is like a 22 seconds delay, which I apply in double. So, and that's where the canon method comes in, because I start my first loop at point A, goes on 22 seconds, I play whatever I want. I know it will return to me, but at the same time, there's number 2 loop of 22 seconds, because it's in dual mode. So I get another line, which is completely asynchronized to the first one. And then you start to play, because then you start to actually play, for instance, towards particular moments in loop A, and then you want to interact to it. When it comes back, it will never be on the same spot. And that's where like the canon method says, like you start at a particular point A, and you start at point B somewhere else. And they will never interact with each other at the same time all over again. And that makes it so, for me, so interesting to work with. At the same time, it's also pretty complex if you think about it, because now I just breathe it, so to speak. I know those 22 seconds. I just, that's the way how my heart beats, so to speak. When I perform it, I know when it comes back to me. I know when I have to interact. I know when I have to do nothing. Because, of course, you can easily, again, destroy it if you are placing too much notes onto each other at the same spot. When you know, oh, this is coming back to me at that point, so I probably would not interact at that moment and wait for a few seconds and then interact.
Yes.
But that's also something which it's almost like playing the piano with two hands and doing totally different movements with each hand.
Yeah.
It's the same kind of philosophy. It's like a lot of, also with free impro that's also something you learn, is like you don't interact with somebody at the moment you feel it's right to interact. No, you just don't do that. You wait for a while and then you interact. And that makes it so interesting. And that makes it evolving, and it makes it challenging, not only for yourself, but also for the person who you're playing together with.
Yes.
And that's the same with the looping pedal. The looping pedal is actually a partner with you in what you want to create. And that's why I feel so sad sometimes when I hear looped music, is that, oh, come on, you can do way more than that with it. It's like almost like using the presets of your synthesizer, for instance. That's the same thing. I never used the presets of the M1, for instance. It was a difficult workstation. It was one of the first workstations. It was not easy to work with, but I struggled. But I managed to actually create my own, sounds with it, because I felt, but back then, you could easily hear all the commercials on television. They used all the M1 with all the presets. Typical. Those presets are so unique, so distinctive. You could easily recognize them. Why would you use presets with a keyboard, while the workstation, actually the name says it itself, you have to work to create your own sounds? And that's with the looping pedal as well. The looping pedal is there for you to work with and to apply it to your own particular space. And there are way more possibilities, but you have to put your energy in it.
Maybe one final question about that one is, you've moved from, among others, the keys to mainly using the guitar for music which has lots of contact points with each other. Do you think, what changes in terms of the results, do you think, when moving from playing something on a keyboard instrument to a guitar?
I have to be careful now what I say, though, because some people could really, could say I'm wrong, but the guitar actually, and although I was an anti-guitarist for a long time when I was playing the synthesizer, I really hated the guitars, but of course, when you listen to like cheesy metal or whatever, or rock music, or the rock station music, then of course, then the guitar is applied differently. But I never knew that a guitar could be such a versatile instrument. And that's what I discovered when I slowly started to play the guitar. And I feel at this point now, and what I can do with it also, with recreating the ambient style I used to do with Vietnamana, I think the guitar is way more versatile and way more organic than any synthesizer can be. As long as you apply it well, as long as you use it to your own benefit, it's an amazing instrument. It's really an amazing
I think
instrument.
the main problem with synthesizers for the past 20, 30 years is that the interface hasn't changed. It's like,
No.
hardly. And I think you'll never be as close, like your fingers are literally on the strings, on the sound producing.
Exactly, and that's also something I would never say before when I was doing synthesizer, because then I would be an advocate for, no, a synthesizer can also, you can also put feeling in it, and and of course you had the touch sensitive quality of the keys and everything, but that was all in a sense in one particular aspect of creating music, or what it needed to be. But the guitar, indeed, like it's You can be very expressive, you can be very harsh, you can be very intimate, you can be very mellow, you can be very atonal. You can do a lot of things with the electric guitar, especially also the acoustic guitar, by the way. But that's a different story. But but yeah, it has been from that moment on has been when I was doing microphonic. To be clear, okay, I'm not going to synthesizers anymore. I will find my way through the electric guitar. I couldn't play the electric guitar, so I had to study my own. But that's the way I like it, you know. It's like, okay, you go through this rough period of finding, exploring, and then you find something that you can be satisfied with, and then you learn, you fall, you stand up, you go further, and then, and at this point, the guitar is my only source of sound now.
So maybe you said it's your Bible, so maybe it's a good time now to talk about No Pussyfooting by Fripp and Eno.
Yes.
When it came out, reportedly, Fripp's record company hated the album, Eno's record company hated the album, the press hated the album or didn't care about the album at all. Tell me why it is so important to you, why it is such a great album to you.
I mean, first of all, it's because it was made in 72. Mm-hmm. So it's, for me, that's like, okay, I know that the late 60s, early 70s, up to the early 80s has been like a revolution in terms of what people created with sound, with like electronic instruments, with electronic tools and so forth. So, I mean, there are definitely other albums which are absolutely significant in music history, but I feel like that No Pussyfooting is for me like that album that how must I say, avoids all conventions, so to speak. It has almost no melody, it has absolutely no real structure, but at the same time it works with so many interesting elements that do create for me a structure, that do create for me, or I hear a melody.
Yes.
But it's a melody that expanded over time, so to speak. That it's part of the theme over time they create, and that's, for me, that has been such an inspiration, because I never have been really like a lover for straightforward melodies. I always have been something like, okay, you have to listen to a piece from the beginning to the end to understand the melody, to understand the theme. And that's what I found so fascinating with No Pussyfooting, is that it actually generates that over time. At the end of the first side, for instance, when you talk about the vinyl, you can actually know what they were going for. Mm-hmm. It's not in the beginning. No, you have to follow the entire process. You have to understand. You have to you absorb the entire process, and then you know what they wanted to do, what they wanted to create. And I feel also, not only musically, but then technically, it's an amazing album. I mean, with the looping, the old reel-to-reel looping devices they used, I still can't comprehend, and I'm a technical nerd in a way with pedals and so forth. I still can't comprehend how they did it, how they created, for instance, the sound of Fripp's guitar. How they, it's a fascinating album which I can't get bored of at all. I play it probably every month. I have to play it once. It's like my Bible. And also, even when back then, Tobias, it was absolutely destroyed in the press. But still, at this moment, ask how many people know No Pussyfooting.
Yes.
Not many people.
Oh.
And it's the Bible of everything that comes afterwards. It has looping. It's the uber drone album. Sorry to say that. It's the best drone album that ever has been made, and at the same time, it has something like very spatial, very airy, very out there. That it also incorporates a lot of almost cosmic elements in a way. It's like, but in the right sense of the word.
Yes.
So it's, for me, I can't put my affection and my admiration and my respect for that album. I think there are not enough words to actually, it's and I feel ashamed that still at this point, it's not considered to be like a milestone in music.
I agree. It's interesting. It hasn't been really appreciated. Like many, this is always these cyclical things. Sometimes people discover something later. This one seems like it's no,
and it's also a collaboration between two artists.
Yes.
Who actually meant a great deal for the music history as well. Look at Robert Fripp, an amazing musician. Of course, one of the founders of King Crimson, but also his solo albums. Look at Brian Eno, where he came from with Roxy Music and what he did with his fantastic Here Come the Warm Jets and solo album and all these, and later on as well, these ambient albums. But this one is like, it found them also like me and Steve, for instance, at that moment in time when we were doing that, like it found ourselves at the peak of what we could do in that. I feel also that album was like that. They never overclassed this one afterwards. They did amazing things afterwards. Absolutely. But this one stands out so much. It's like, and I every time you can really look on with interviews with me on the internet. If they ask me about favorite albums, it's always in there.
I listened to an Index of Metals first, I think, so that's why I have an affection for that one.
But that's also a good one. Yeah, Evening Star. It's a fantastic album, but still, if you think about this one, like for instance, the second side, Swastika Girls. Not only the title. It's so provocative at that same, it's, you have to put it into the context of what it was. It was back then, the early 70s. There was a lot of, look at names of bands, Joy Division, New Order, all these bands were very provocative.
Yes.
And it was allowed to be provocative at that time, even when you were not supporting that kind of, ideology, but also that piece itself, Swastika Girls, is so in your face. It's so atonal. It's so, it's so challenging. It's, well, I mean, I can imagine that, the labels weren't really happy to release it, but eventually I'm really happy they did, because for me, it's an album that changed probably my entire philosophy in terms of how to create music.
When did you buy that one? Was that like very like before Vida Umana? Was it during?
During. I think it was like 86 I discovered it, 87, something like that. Yeah. I discovered, of course, first his On Land album from Brian Eno. That was the first album I listened to, which I found that's also something that's a different story, of course. And then I went back to his Music for Airports and then his collaborations with Harold Budd, and then I discovered this one, the Robert Fripp collaboration. And that from that moment on, the appliance of looping and everything. And then I went to Fripp and discovered his Let the Power Fall and all these solo albums he did with his Frippertronics. And it was an ear and an eye opener for me, definitely.
Okay. What I found interesting is, and maybe that's a question for you, is that the album was recorded in just 3 sessions, like on 3 recording days, but they were spread out, like spaced out over a year. So a very long time, but just 3 recordings. Would that idea interest you? Because you said several times you don't want to overproduce and you don't want to go like become too anal about the whole production thing. But is that, I think maybe part of why it is so interesting is because it sort of fuses different mindsets they were in at 3 points in time, and that makes one thing which is completely cohesive out of that.
Yeah, that's true. I think I would be less pro that in a way, because I always, like when I'm recording an album, I always want to be in that world for a moment and keep that momentum going, and then move on to another. So it's every time for me, it's like a new chapter in a book, so to speak.
Yes.
So we're returning. yeah, for me, it's like maybe that's still a little bit of the control freak I still have in me, although I try to absolutely, you know, exercise that because I don't feel it's really healthy. But I think really that I really want to, yeah, in a way, structure it more. I can't feel like this. I found it like a bold movement to actually go from that incredible opening piece on side A and then go to a completely different piece on side B. That's a very bold movement. I think up till this moment I still wouldn't do that. I would like to keep it in the same realm, so to speak, in the same kind of mood,
Yeah.
character. So so yeah, it's an interesting thing that they I don't know why they actually did it 1 year apart from it. Maybe they
I think when I read Brian Eno's statements, which are always very interesting, I think that Brian Eno is a control freak himself. And I think these methods which he developed, which sound really hippie-esque and sort of naive, I think he developed those to rein in his control, like his obsession with control. So I think
Yeah.
it's like a almost like a psychological tool, an exercise to let go.
Yeah.
I have this suspicion because I somehow don't buy into this thing that someone who talks about music the way he does would just be laissez-faire and just let's do it. So maybe I think maybe it's spreading it out meant coming into each session having almost forgotten what they'd done before,
Yeah.
picking it up.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point you make, and probably maybe it's that because I can't see that technically. Of course, you had different kind of tools to use, but at the same time, it wasn't really that the possibilities weren't that endless like it is now in the digital world.
Totally.
So I wonder what he was doing in that year time. So probably it must be more conceptually, I think.
Could be.
That it
Yeah.
yeah, that he would say maybe, or maybe it was just like the agendas didn't collide. Could be either.
We need to wait for the 33 and a third book on No Pussyfooting, unless it
Yeah.
already exists. Could be actually.
I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
It's like I buy because I have 4 different versions of the vinyl already.
Wow.
But not, yeah, they're all the same. But I just don't want to waste one vinyl and then find it out that you can't play it anymore because it's so crackly. So I have 4 old prints of the vinyl. So but because I didn't check out the slow versions and everything, I didn't want to go there.
Well, you have a turntable. You can create the slow version yourself.
That's true. That's true. But at the same time, this is the album. This is what you should listen to. It's like.
Since we already talked about the looping pedal, maybe for time reasons, I'd like to add one question to this, and then maybe skip the looping pedal, because we've talked about analog, and now we've talked about the vinyl thing. I don't know if you were you've been following it, but there was a huge scandal around Mobile Fidelity being sort of semi-dishonest about their sourcing of records and using high-resolution digital transfers to cut analog records from. So I grabbed.
Oh no, I didn't follow that one.
Yeah,
oh,
yeah. I can send you a link to your
Okay.
video. It's very interesting. And I picked one of your Fearful's Burning records out, and it said digitally remastered. So I thought it was interesting. So how important is like this keeping the chain completely analog to you? Do you have in your mind? Do you place huge value on recording analog, cutting analog, presenting it in analog, ideally on vinyl?
To a degree, I do, but at the same time, you have to work with the tools you have. And for me, it's like being a DIY musician. I can't afford all like the fantastic preamps and the outboard analog tube devices. So I also have to, must I say, unfortunately, use a lot of digital software tools to actually master but over time, and I have to admit though, over time, in the beginning it wasn't there because there was an overabundance of bad software tools, plugins. But now, I mean, thanks to I work closely with a studio in Anderlecht, Brussels. It's called the Sunny Side Inc. Studio, where I record most of the free impro sessions. It's a fantastic live room. Nicolas Lefebvre is an incredible engineer, and he gives me a lot of pointers and suggestions which plugins I need to get to actually get really decent analog-esque compression, EQing,
Yes.
really good room reverbs that you almost don't hear. It's actually like a room reverb that you feel like you're actually in a room. Those exist, but you have to find them, and that's thanks to those suggestions the engineer made that I now am able to actually master, even for vinyl, like albums which come from like almost like an analog source, like recording with microphones onto like a portable device.
Yes.
Okay, it goes into the digital area again, but still you record it with, like analog microphones, like ribbon microphones and so forth. So, but that said, it's like those plugins really changed it completely for me. Back then with Fear Falls Burning, indeed, like digitally remastered, it was like a phrase that was used all the time. That's why I used it,
Okay.
in a way. So there's nothing really like strict philosophical about it or anything. It's like I would never use that term again, digitally remastered. I would now say, okay, remastered, boom, for that particular edition, like I'm now doing with all the Vindamana reissues for Zoharem. It has been an incredible process. Why? Because now A, I have, of course, the knowledge how to do it properly, and B, I have the tools to do it properly. All these really good plugins, I only need a couple of plugins and I can really do a really good remastering of old stuff, which is actually not really sounding that great anymore, but you can upgrade it to a level that is acceptable for me to have it reissued, So there's a fine balance you need to pursue, I think, between the analog and the digital. And I think both worlds can be benefit to what you want to do and what you want to aim for. It's just like you have to make sure you make the right choices in terms of what you want to, or what you buy and how you want to use them.
Do you think that ultimately the analog sound can be reproduced like almost one-to-one in digital environment once resolution?
No, that's utopia, I think. That is, of course, there's always like, probably, somehow perception also tricks the mind as well, because there are a lot of people say, oh, I can hear the difference when it's recorded on 48 kilohertz instead of 44.1 kilohertz. I don't believe that. I think it's all in the mind somehow. Although maybe they have extraordinary ears. I don't know, but I don't think there is a huge difference. But I think between analog and digital, if you hear how something analog comes out of, for instance, when you picked it up with an analog microphone, because now I'm recording with a digital microphone, for instance. Which is great for this kind of purpose. But when you record, like for instance, a double bass, and you're using an old analog ribbon microphone, it's a totally different world. It's a totally different world. It sounds warm, it sounds deep, it sounds round, which you don't have with a pure digital condenser microphone, for instance.
Okay.
It's a totally different. Then you have to go way more into the EQing to make it actually work. While with a ribbon microphone, if you place it right, if you have a good microphone, a good preamp, and you record it on your digital system, you almost have to do nothing about it. You can easily put it, and that's it, because it records the instrument so authentically that you hardly have to do anything about it. That's. Listen to those old jazz records, for instance. It's amazing how they do that. It's amazing. And they also only did it with a couple of microphones.
Very few
and
microphones.
Only a few. And what they did do And that's also something which a lot of musicians don't realize these days anymore, is they place the musicians and their instruments in the room. They make the balance in the room. They couldn't do it because they didn't have multi-track. They just placed them again. And that's how you actually should also make music together. You don't have to be like the lead guitarists have to be all the way in the front and then make noise, and then all the other musicians have to turn up their amps so much that they, because otherwise they can't hear themselves anymore, or at least the audience can't hear themselves. No, you have to balance the volume of each instrument to each other and make it work.
Yeah.
And that's what the free impro also, has been, so educational for me, because there you do that in an analog way. You decide where you stand on the stage. You decide where you want to be, what your role is in the band, and so forth. You do it all analog on that spot, and that's how you record it as well. And that's where you can go fully analog. But in terms of recording something, digitally, and then trying to make it analog, I don't think it will work. No.
Okay, great. So we'll go through the next ones a bit quicker because we're
9 minutes.
reaching another Zoom timeout. So die Höfner-Akten with Asmus Tietjens. This combination of artists is really interesting to me. I think Asmus actually went on record to say he hates drone music. So why do you think, I don't know if you ever talked about this, why do you think your collaboration just works? Like, it's two completely different approaches to music.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, of course, we did collaborations, when I was still Vietnamana, and that was more indeed like droney-esque. So he worked with droney-esque material before, but I can sense where he comes from when he says he hates drone music in a way, because we never wanted to make something like very linear either. We always wanted to be evolving all the time in our collaborations. But when I contacted him after a while to say, okay, hey Asmus, I really want to do another collaboration with you, but things change. It's completely like, the opposite of what I have been doing before. But I want to send you, sources of the first album was Air on my own label, A New Wave of Jazz. It's done with only wind instruments, clarinet, accordion, concertina, flute, and harmonica. Are you interested? I said, ooh, this sounds strange, she said to me, but give me a try. And then he said, oh, this has been like afterwards. It's a fantastic album, what he did with it. Amazing. Absolutely what I expected what Asmus would do. Take it out of the box.
Yes.
Completely change it and make it something totally different, which is the sum of us together, but at the same time something else as well. So that's the beauty when Asmus does something. And secondly, he was so surprised that he had actually a lot of fun in the studio working with that, because he said to me, it's so different from all the other source material I ever got that it became one of my favorite things to work on in the studio. So that was first, the first collaboration. And then I came to him and said, okay, why don't we expand it to, me supplying you with all free impro acoustic guitar. But that's heavy stuff, because it's a lot of frenetic stuff. It's a lot of atonal. It's a lot of rapid movements on the strings. So it's, for him, it's like, I think it would have been like a serious ordeal to actually dig in, find particular moments in those pieces to actually work with. And he said, okay, let me try it. And he listened to the source and he said to me, well, this is going to be a challenge for me. But at the same time, when he sent me the album, it was like a natural thing. I said, this is what you needed to do, my friend. This is what I expected. It's like, I don't need you to follow the music. I need you to actually dissect, rearrange, transform, reprocess, whatever. You do what you do so great and work with it. But at the same time, he always have the ability to absolutely almost stay truthful to the source as well, because you can also hear it on the album. You can hear actually the performance I'm doing. You can actually hear the lively playfulness I apply on the guitar. You can actually hear that, but at the same time, you don't. So it's a fascinating process, which is, and we are already moving ahead to the next one, will totally different again, but yeah, I mean, for him also, has been a discovery of like acoustic instruments for him to work on. He did once like the Notturno album where he recycled piano. And he probably used some other acoustic, but most of it's all electronic. So for him it's also a challenge, and I think he gets a great deal of satisfaction from working with that kind of totally different source material coming from a guy who used to know as one of the main ambient musicians. So it's fun, and it's always fun with Asmus, and that's a perfect prime example of collaborations that work over mail, so to speak, or over the internet sharing files. That's one of those successful ones.
What's your take on the difference between using pure synthetic sound and acoustic sounds recorded and then treated? I mean, this is acoustic sound, but the result is still it's very electronic.
It's very electronic, but at the same time, what I find so fascinating with Asmus, and he had been doing this all over his entire career, is he always makes it sound so organic. I mean, there are other electronic, composers and electroacoustic composers when you hear them applying analog machines or analog synthesizer or analog, whatever, and you can hear that they are generating very electronic sounding, music. With Asmus, you can hear he applies electronic tools to make it something which is his own, apart maybe from his Sky Records period, where he uses deliberately synthesizers and so forth, but all the recycling stuff, like just, look at it, just listen to the ones with Arcane Device, listen to all the other albums he did, even the soul albums, they all sound very organic, even when it's made with electronic devices. There's something in his kind of the way how he uses that makes it so unique and vintage Asmus teachings for me. There is no album I can put on and I don't know if always I hear it's Asmus, always.
Well, there's something about that. That's true.
Yeah,
there's a sort of a humor sometimes in there, almost.
Oh, absolutely, and that I love also so much. I'm a dedicated guy. When I'm healthy, hopefully in a healthy way, ambitious in a way. I always want to move forward. I always want to, share my music out there. I always want to play, and when I'm there and when I need to do it, then I'm dedicated. But I'm also I love to be positive in life. In a way, I want to look at the bright side. And with him, it's always like it's always like a lot of fun to work with, and that's why we also called it the Höfner Akten, because it's like a very first we wanted to make it like the FBI files or something like that, and that's why we named it the Höfner file Akten, because of course it's all played with Höfner guitars.
Yes.
So yeah. So it's in a way it's humor,
So the other track, the final one I picked was one by François Bale, and I saw on your Instagram account that you're a fan. And the interesting thing is, this piece I picked it's actually also from 1973, the same year that No Pussyfooting was released. The interesting thing is, of course, here's someone who's coming from academia, like a trained composer. So we have academia versus intuition, composition versus improvisation, intellect versus gut feeling, maybe. So there's lots of polar opposites. What do you find in his music that maybe even inspires you, or which is interesting? to you?
Yeah, what inspires me is actually the approach he applies to his electroacoustic music, because it's way more than just electronic music. Of course, he applies a lot of voices, field recordings, and everything. But also, like when I just recently said with Asmus, is the comparison with Francois Bell is significant. Why? Because whatever he does, even when he's applying acoustic elements in his music, Francois, it still sounds electric. It still sounds electronical. And that's the difference with Asmus, for instance. The Asmus approach is way more organic. I feel that the approach a lot of those electroacoustic composers did back then was from a pure electronic state of mind. I think it was also probably part of their research. They wanted to when they wanted to go deep into those electronic instruments and make them work to create their own, what they wanted to achieve with it. But in a sense, I think they never were going to be tempted to actually transform an electronic instrument into something that sounds more analog or organic. I think they were completely fascinated and fully dedicated to applying the electronic instrument for what it is, instead of transforming it. I think, but at the same time, it's like, although you would think it's like a sort of a strict laboratory ordeal with those composers, at the same time I'm very fascinated about how lively and almost improvised it feels.
Yes, totally.
Yeah. So I wonder where, of course, I read a little bit about Francois Bayle, his philosophy and his the way how he does it, but at the same time, I couldn't really understand or discover if that is really on purpose or if it is all part of the composition, so to speak.
Yes,
but it feels very, very lively.
Morten Subotnik, I think that is you could put that on, and it's accessible. I mean, people would dig that. I mean, they still do. That's why it sold so many copies. It's
especially Morten. Morten has been really indeed like one of the referential, a little bit more than actually by or like, for instance, Joris de Laat, which is a Flemish electroacoustic composer, very, 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 I mean, very relevant to what he did in the 80s and 70s. So yeah, I mean, they're like Sub Rosa, the label did an amazing thing of re-releasing those old electroacoustic albums, because they also are very significant, as with, for instance, No Pussyfooting, is that they are part of a period in music history when things were explored in such a way that I feel sometimes quite envy and jealous about that. I wasn't there in that period. If you read, or for instance, now I'm listening to a lot to Olivier Messiaen, for instance, and if you read his history, where he was, with whom he taught and got his degree with, and who were his students and so forth. I think it must have been a fascinating, area to be in. Absolutely. At that point, While now I feel everything is like, I don't know. I don't think I have to be careful with my words, but I don't think there's not that many of the urge isn't that big anymore to actually explore, like push things forward. Everything is so mediocre these days in terms of everything in the world. I mean, look at social media, look at all this, everything is, fabricated to your instant pleasure. Everything is like, and I feel that also with music, this is happening a lot. That's why, I think that's why also there are so many reissues these days as well, because to be honest, I mean, I I I still look forward to discover new music, interesting music, but I always tend to go back to the old guys, the old school, industrial music, the old school ambient music, the electroacoustic composers from the 70s and the 60s. It's it's a strange. I think it's we're in a strange. Maybe it's like a phase, and maybe something new will come out of this. I don't know, but I feel that we're definitely in limbo in terms of how music is evolving these days.
It may be that the developments are taking place in an area of music which is outside your or my personal sphere of interest.
Let's hope so.
I mean,
Yeah, let's hope so.
I wonder about one thing is that, like, for pieces like this one, and I also think about some of the stuff John Cage did, like the electronic Cage, which is not that huge part of his work, but he did some electronic pieces, and sometimes he would work 100 hours for 7 minutes of music. And I think lots of that is the way. And if you listen to it today, I think a modern laptop composer could create something similar in almost in real time,
Yeah,
using good apps and software. Do you still think there's a value in putting in the hours? Do you think there's
I think so too. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I always have been like, you know, I think the main benefit of making music is the search to find particular sounds. I always have been fascinated by sounds, not by excuse me, excuse me, by combination of notes and making harmonies and making melodies. No, for me, the initial process is always finding sound, finding interesting sound. What I can do with that sound from the moment I found it,
yes,
and move on with that. And I feel to find that particular sound or find those combinations of sound, you have to work for it. It's like when I told you the M1 workstation, you have to work to actually make it sound good. Brian Eno did the same thing with his Yamaha DX7 he used for so many times. That's an really that's an hard instrument to crack.
yes.
It's a very difficult, but I'm sure he worked hours and hours and hours to actually make it his own. And I feel with the John Cage thing is I think it only benefits not only maybe not the music because like you said yourself, maybe you can do it easy in an easier way now these days with a laptop. But at the same time, I think you benefit from that as a person, as who you want to be in terms of being a sound artist or being a musician. I feel always that challenges you and that makes you better. It's like I when I started to play the acoustic guitar, for instance, that was with that sounded like nothing. Sounded awful, sounded, so and I still apply the guitar in a totally different way than a lot of other guitarists will do. But that's my own thing, and I discovered that by playing it, by using it, by turning the guitar upside down, trying different things with it, and so forth and so forth and so forth. And that's what to be honest, makes me whole as a person, and I feel that it enriches me with a lot of knowledge I couldn't have before if I wouldn't spend the hours with the instrument in the studio, for instance.
Yes, that's
So
probably it. I mean, when you see someone improvise, you just see the moment. But of course, there's so much that goes into creating that moment. like,
oh yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. And also, and that's a solo thing in the studio. You work on your techniques. You work on the way how you want to work with your instrument, for instance. But from the moment you come together, then with your partners on the stage, and you want to create something, ad hoc there on the spot, then suddenly those techniques doesn't matter anymore. That's a strange thing you learn in the studio yourself.
yes,
You will still apply them in your subconsciousness, but they will the outcome will be different. They will sound different. You will play different. Why? Because you will get the feedback or the inspiration from the people who you are playing with on the stage. So there's a particular strange element to it. Doesn't matter how many times you rehearse in the studio, the outcome when you're playing together with other musicians will be totally different. The only thing is that how comfortable you are on your own instrument, and that I think that's where it's worthwhile to spend all the hours rehearsing or trying out different things and feel what is good with you, or what kind of tools will you use to prepare your guitar with, and so forth and so forth.
In terms of the path you've taken, I think now working with the archtop guitar, that's probably like, and I could see it as a momentary endpoint, because where are you going to go after this? Can you, to conclude this conversation, maybe talk about like what the beauty of this particular guitar? It's and the sound, like I thought you had a beautiful sound on microphonics with Les Paul, but this is also, I mean, it has a very unique color. And can you see some like a situation where you would allow electronics more back into your music again at some point?
Not in combination with the acoustic guitar, I think, at this point. I don't see where that would lead to, in a way, at this point. So I never say never, of course. But why? For particular for the because I found now a beautiful balance between working with the electric guitar, still my Les Paul guitar, I still have it, and doing my ambient stuff, which I still now and then do, completely with a few pedals and the guitar, and apply it, in a way that I can.
So this is one,
For instance,
consciousness, yes.
yeah, or like the new one I have with this sax player, Trusta. It's an album called Island on the Moon, and it's an album I did with him spontaneously in the studio. So the thing is, like, the electric side of me has now the ability to fully improvise. I don't need to prepare anything anymore. No themes, nothing. I just go there where they want me to be. I play an ambient set, fully improvised. I can do that now. So that's my, almost I say, that's my Vidna Mana-esque phase. My two sides of me, that's still there, but I can do it in such a way now that it only provides me with joy on the moment itself, with creating this, because I know now I feel so comfortable with improvising and knowing my tools that I don't need any kind of preparation up front. That's one thing. The other thing is the acoustic guitar. Is why? Because it frees me completely from any kind of additional electronic tools I need to focus on. It's just one instrument, me behind the instrument, and boom, that's it. And that makes it so confrontational at the same time, but at the same time also so liberating. Because, in a way, you don't need to look at anything anymore. You just have one guitar. Okay, if a string snaps, then you have another thing to look for. But anyway, the guitar itself is the thing. You don't need anything else anymore. You just you're there. Boom, you pick up the guitar, you tune it up, and you're off.
Yes.
And that for me has been like a incredible. Apart from the fact when I learned to improvise with the electric guitar. This is the next step into liberating me completely from all the pressure, all the control freakness, to make it all sound that perfect. If every little tool is working properly. No, now you have only one tool and the guy behind it, and it's all coming to me now to actually make it work. And that's the beauty of it. Why the archtop guitar? The archtop guitar is like the perfect acoustic equivalent I can use, because the power, the volume it has, it's way more than just a regular acoustic guitar, because it's the body is bigger, it has the F holes, so the volume is being projected way more outwards than inwards. So you can if everything is placed correctly on the stage, you can easily play fully acoustic still in combination with a drummer and a sax player and so forth. So that's the Aardvark guitar. And why the Höfner guitar is because I discovered the Höfner a couple of years ago, and I found out that it's actually it's a very eccentric sound it has. I mean, especially the old archtop guitars from the 50s and the 60s. I only have those I have no new Höfner guitars, so I only have the old ones. And those instruments are actually, so willful in terms of how they sound. Either way, they sound a little bit more too warm, too dark, or they sound too metal. They have a little bit of an edgy sound to it, which a lot of singer-songwriters or musicians who want to play just like beautiful notes and beautiful melodies don't really like. They really like to have that kind of warm, beautifully balanced out acoustic sound of the guitar. And that's why you can find them so easily and at such a cheap price as well, because nobody wants them. Really. Nobody wants them. And I have this like a 52, I have a 51, I have a 58, a 57, I have the 61. So it's like all these. Yeah. That's why I'm recording those 7 volumes of solo acoustic guitar, because I have 7 of them, so there need to be 7 albums. Yeah, because they sound. I know. I'm a little bit. I'm pretty fanatic about it, but because they all have their own identity. They also, the way how they allow you to play it is also different. Some of them are more roughly to play, like it's hard work to actually get really proper notes out of it, or or the rhythmical phases are different. It's every guitar has its own little character, and that makes it so fascinating as well, to, like, for instance, when I'm invited to go to a free improv gig, then I choose, okay, which guitar I will bring this time. Maybe I will bring that one because I know I need a harder sound and I need something more like violent, like a little bit more edgy. So I bring that one. Or when it's a little bit more like a more minimal thing, then I can bring that guitar because I don't need to really plug the strings that hard and so forth. So it's like almost choosing your pedals, but now I just choose one guitar,
Thanks for listening. Join us again next time for another round of conversations with the leading producers of our time. For more production tips and expertise, visit the Beat website or take a look at our PDF edition in English, available from all major digital newsstands.